Hey, Brigham with Drift here. In this video, 5 things I think you should know about the Korua Uberegg. Before I get into the specifics, check out my specs and my biases below so you know where I'm coming from as a rider. We own the boards we talk about, get them in a variety of conditions, and then we let you know what we think. The first thing you need to know about the Uberegg is that this is a pure powder board. Everything about this board is about float and performance in the powder, and there's no compromises on that. So it's going to make it not very good in any other condition. But if you are looking for the ultimate powder board, this deserves to be on the list. Everything about the shape is extreme in that direction of powder performance. The biggest thing is that this is full rocker, and not just full rocker, but a significant amount of rocker. If you put that tail down, and you can see how that thing lifts up towards the nose. The other extremes are that this is very wide. It might not look that wide because of the taper, but under the front foot, it's super wide, and under the back foot, it's still quite wide, even though it has so much taper. And then the last thing that's extreme is that not only is it rockered tip to tail, but it's actually rockered heel to toe as well. So the base is beveled towards the heel and toe side edges. All of that combines to make this one of the best floaters that I've ever ridden. I don't know if I'm ready to say it's the best floating board that I've ever been on, but it is up there if it's not at the top of the list. And only the biggest, longest, widest boards from, whatever brands make boards that extreme compete with this. And even compared to other Koruas like the Dart or the Pintonic, which float really well, the camber profile here gives this thing an edge. It is really fun to ride in deep powder. The second thing you should know is that this only comes in one size. And so you're just going to need to look at those numbers and see if those specs work out for you. One of the things I really love about this, and as you've heard me say if you've been watching the channel, I'm not a huge fan of volume shifted boards, but this shape works in this length. In a 157 at this width and with all this rocker, it's got a really fun feel, and I wouldn't compare it almost at all to the other volume shifted options out there that might look similar as far as their width and their length. It's pretty different. If the size works with your specs and you look at their chart, they do a good job of laying out who fits on what boards. This is an awesome option. The third thing about this, and probably my favorite thing, was a little surprise, and that is that once I put my bindings on this thing and I mounted these inserts in the front and the setback inserts in the back to get the wide stance that I usually enjoy. And I've tried to go narrower. I just don't love it. I like a more powerful stance that forces me into kind of that powerful position. So I stayed 23.5 inches wide, which is pretty wide for a board like this. But once you mount back here, one of the things you notice is that there's just so little tail back there. And I thought that this was just going to be so surfy off of the back foot because of the shape and because there's just no tail. But the pleasant surprise for me was, despite this shape, and don't get me wrong, it's a surfy, turny board, but there's some strength and some power back there, and you can hammer on that back end, you can rail on it, you can push into it, you can push off of it. I was just stoked at how that felt. Even in the powder, I generally tend to push pretty hard. I like to ride fast. I like to push the board. And I loved how much power and stability I got out of this back end. And I think a big part of it is, if you've seen any Korua boards, pretty much all of them, as far as I can tell, they're maybe a little bit overbuilt. They're a little beefy, they're a little thick, and the thickness of this sidewall, it carries all the way past the back insert back to here. And the tail doesn't start to thin until about right there. And so even though it looks like there's just nothing back there, you actually get a pretty decent amount of thickness and strength underfoot. I loved that. The fourth thing is because I know someone's going to ask, how does this carve? And Korua actually has a video of this being ridden on the corduroy. I actually thought this was really fun on a groomer, and it's not because it rips a carve, okay? Do not look at this board or get this board for what it does anywhere except for the powder. It's a powder board. It's for the very best runs of your life, to be perfectly honest. But I thought it was fun to carve, and not because it locks in, but actually because of how like squirrely and loose it is. So as far as it feeling surfy, that's where you'll feel it, is on the groomer. Those edges are a little hard to find, and when you find them, they're not that easy to hold. But I thought it was actually kind of fun. As long as you don't push too hard or try to go too fast, then it can get a little bit scary. The fifth thing and the final thing, the only downside for me for a board like this, because all those other things to me aren't downsides. When you make a board that's so specifically for one thing, all the things that it doesn't do well, to me that's not a downside. It's just not the intended purpose. But the one downside is with a shape like this, I feel like full rocker boards, they tend to be a little bit slower than a longer board with some camber. And the difference is longer boards with some camber often can do a little bit better job of getting onto the powder and then planing on top of the powder and keeping the nose up without putting the tail too far down into the snow. With a shape like this, the name of the game is really sinking that back end and just banana that nose out of the snow. And it gives it an insane amount of float, but because you're kind of pushing through the snow like this, it tends to make the board feel a little bit slower than some other shapes. For me, I still went as fast as I wanted. Honestly, with a board like this, it's nice if it actually forces you to chill out a little bit and enjoy the turns. That's something I'm not very good at doing and have to kind of be forced into. So it's far from a deal breaker, but if you want to go faster in the powder, especially if it's lower angle, you might have better luck with a gun that's longer and that actually has some camber and that actually can kind of plane out onto the snow and point down more than kind of point up and kind of push through the snow. And the steeper the terrain is, the less that matters. For me, I had a feeling when I saw this, like, man, that might end up being one of my favorite boards ever. And especially with the drift boards, this is what drift is all about. Taking the ultimate board into the backcountry for the best runs of your life, a board that's never going to be in a split. You wouldn't want it in a split. It wouldn't work in a split, but you throw it on your back and you go get those turns. And it would work for the resort too, but it is going to be a board that on one or two of the best days of the season, you're going to ride it for 2 or 3 runs and then you're going to put it away. If you get more powder than that, then congratulations to you. And if you don't, then you know you were on one of the best powder boards you can buy and just maximize the potential of those runs, which I love. So that's the Korua Uberegg. I'd love to hear from you. Hit me up below with your questions and comments.